For 'tis the bell. Welcome everyone to our Politico pub at the heart of Labour Party conference here in Liverpool. And it's fitting that we should be holding this interview in a pub, because the last time that I sat down with the Defence Secretary, John Healey, was nearly a year ago, I think, John, when you were about to sign the Trinity House agreement with your German counterpart, Boris Pistorius, paving the way to greater defence cooperation between the UK and Germany, which sounds like quite, a hardcore reporting job. And we ended up basically in the middle of the day in a London pub, all having beer together, when you had managed to convince the German Defence Secretary and his team that his time was well spent going down the pub. Now, I gather, so this is perfect for you, right? What's not to like?
Hey, well,
cheers.
First of all, cheers, yes.
Cheers to everyone.
We'd actually just signed the agreement, and then rather than have the formal bilateral meeting, I suggested we went down the pub. That was the Traitor's Gate, but we'll move on from that. It was, why did we do it?
Yeah. Other than because you just like going to the pub.
I think in the end, because, and I hadn't expected this when I got this job just over a year ago. I hadn't expected the relations with my counterparts to be quite so important. I'd sort of thought, and I suppose I'd forgotten from 14, 15 years before when I was in government, most business is conducted government to government. You've got great civil service machines, but actually in the end, the personal relations really matter. And particularly in defence and security, where we were trying to rebuild. First of all, we'd set out as a new government to reset relations with some of our closest allies. We were setting out with Germany, in this case, to strike a historic deep agreement on defence, which we'd never had. And in the end, it is your personal relationships which often get you over the line.
And he's still there, so of course that was a good investment.
And he's still there.
But you pulled off this trick as well with the Australian Defence Minister, so you've got a collection of beer mats for different defence ministers.
Well, that freaked the department out. This was in the first 2 weeks, where the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia and the Defence Minister was coming to the UK after we'd been to Washington for the NATO summit. And I said, I don't want to do the bilateral with him that he was coming for down in Whitehall. I want him to come to South Yorkshire, which is where we live and where the constituency is. And I wanted that partly because politician to politician, you're trying to understand and know people. And as a politician, where you're from matters. It matters to how you see your country, how you see your role. And in the end, these formal bilateral meetings are normally on long tables facing each other with large delegations, and you can't really get to talk to people. So we did a visit to a Sheffield foundry. We did a formal bilateral in a large country house in the constituency, and then we ended up in the Rockingham Arms in Wentworth Village, which, for any of you, if you're ever in Rotherham, I'd highly recommend.
There goes the tourist announcement. So let's now turn to the serious business of your role and what we're all very concerned by, which is the security and defence outlook for the UK and beyond. Now, in your conference speech, you announced that the UK is sending anti-drone technology to Denmark, following that suspicious drone activity in Danish airspace last week that briefly closed the airport in Copenhagen. Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, clearly pointed the finger towards the Kremlin. I think that's probably an example where a lot of people who maybe thought, this is something that's only affecting Ukraine, former Soviet countries, Baltic states, I say only, in heavy inverted commas, then begin to see Russian hostility creeping closer to countries that we would consider part of Western Europe. Is there anything more that you can tell us about what you're able to do there, both in the sense of aid to Denmark? There are also quite considerable doubts, I think, that we can protect ourselves from drone attacks efficiently. Are our airports safe?
Well, first of all, we're deploying today the counter-drone technology that Denmark wants now in response to the drone attacks it's seen on its main airport and its regional airports. So that's been deployed today. If anybody's surprised by Russian testing us, Russian aggression, this increasing activity, the increasing attacks in the grey zone, there really shouldn't be. We've seen this before, from everything from the Salisbury poisonings to the fire bombings of factories in East London. And we've seen with Russia a doubling of the air incursions into NATO airspace in the last year alone. So, no one should be any doubt that we are facing that a level of grey zone activity and aggression, which is testing us and testing other countries. It's one of the reasons that the Strategic Defence Review, when we published it in June, said, look, drones and counter-drones have got to be a much bigger part of our thinking and our preparations in future. And I have to say, when we came into government just over a year ago, the previous government had a drone strategy. They'd published it. There were more pictures than pages. There's no funding behind it. And one of the things I've done in this year is to double the amount of funding to 4 billion that we will put into this sort of technology in this year.
Well, you have certainly said that the UK will play a big role, and as you say, you've put your weight behind that idea of a drone wall on NATO's eastern flank. President Zelensky has warned that the dangers of drone warfare spreading beyond Ukraine will not take long to be even nuclear armed, let alone the damage that can be done by conventional weapons attached to drones. What I hear most, John, if I'm honest, as a reservation about everything that the government says about the pace of its investment, is that the threat level is rising faster than what you're able to deliver on your present trajectory of spending, and that the so-called threat window is going to open pretty wide as soon as 2027. Do you believe that you can guarantee the safety of the country by then?
We will keep the country safe. And I sort of contest your contention, if you like. What we can say from Ukraine is that the pace of technology and its development is accelerating. What we can say from Ukraine is that the nature of warfare is changing. And what we can take from Ukraine are some of those lessons and make sure that we learn them ourselves. So you've heard me today in my speech at conference emphasising the fact that this record of defence investment that as a government we're now making is in part to make sure that we can use defence to drive economic growth, that we can get a defence dividend that builds up our British innovation and industry base, because the principal lesson that I take in this area from Ukraine is that a country, when it's under threat or forced to fight, is only as strong as the industry that stands behind it.
But
That's
I notice
number
you
one.
haven't really talked about that timeline, and that's the reason I wanted to press you, was just let me give you an example of that. If the threat window becomes very acute around 2027, the increase in defence spending doesn't really, kicks in very gradually. I know you've advocated for more, like many defence secretaries, but but here we are. What would you do to make sure that soldiers won't be facing a Russian threat in those years, 27 to say 2030, without proper drone capacities and capabilities? But basically, do you see the need to speed up what you're doing, and that means going to Rachel Reeves and asking for more money?
Now, we've got the biggest increase in defence investment since the end of the Cold War. I don't need more money. I need to make the decisions to spend it well, and decisions to spend it on the sort of things that will give us the war-fighting edge. And that, and as the Strategic Defence Review, as well as the lessons from Ukraine tells us, it is combining the leading edge of innovation with some of the hard metal of our traditional platforms. Now, you invite me back, you interview me in 2 years' time, and I am totally confident that we will have transformed Britain's forces and our use of technology, including drones. Why do I say that? Because we will take and we will operate at some of the pace that we see in Ukraine. So 2 weeks ago I signed a deal 3 weeks ago I signed in Kyiv a deal with the Ukrainian Defence Minister. For the first time, Ukraine, because of the very special relationship the UK has with Ukraine, are sharing some of the IP that they have of an interceptor drone. We're taking that, we will develop that in the coming weeks together, and then we will help mass produce that using some of the advanced manufacturing techniques that we have in this country they haven't got in Ukraine, and we'll send those back in their thousands, and we will be able to use those for our own forces and potentially for our NATO allies to create the sort of drone wall that we may need in future on the eastern flank.
You're saying that many people who say
that will be done in months.
In months.
That won't be measured in 2 years' time.
Right. All right. 2 years' time, arguably too late. Will the defence investment plan aim to move?
2 years' time was the target time you've challenged me with, and I'm telling you, by then, you will have seen the...
But is that specifically funded programmes or general aims for future expenditure?
You'll see in the new year a Drone Centre of Excellence set up. You'll see the impetus to get more integration of the way that we procure these in future. You'll see the Navy over the next 2 years starting to put in place what the First Sea Lord has now said, which is we'll go uncrewed wherever we can, and we'll do crewed only when necessary.
Thank you.
She did warn me earlier on that she's
I did. I am a bit of a Rottweiler on this issue.
No, you just said, look, people are having a drink in
a pie, exactly. They're like, okay.
They don't want you droning on, is what
No,
you're saying.
no, he's not droning on. Droning on about drones is literally what you were actually supposed to do. So this category thing of are we at war? Is it right to say the former head of MI5, Baroness Eliza Manning and Buller, used that language today? She talked about hostility, cyber attacks, physical attacks, things that you won't disagree with. But there still seems to be a kind of queasiness. Are we at war with Russia?
We're in a new era of threat. We're under constant, particularly cyber attack. We face new forms and new levels of aggression. And when I say we, I'm talking about NATO allies as well. And I've been quite taken aback as Defence Secretary, to be quite honest. In the last year, we've seen over 90,000 separate attacks, cyber attacks on defence linked to states, many of them from Russia. Now, it's that level of constant pressure, constant aggression, constant testing of the system, which suggests that we've got a level of grey zone aggression in different ways that we may have to be more attuned to, and we have to be able to challenge, we have to be able to deter. And one of the important things that one of my predecessors, Ben Wallace, did was to set up the National Cyber Force.
But
a UK ability not just to defend, but to do offensive cyber as well.
But the one thing I found about the grey zone language is a bit like sort of grey speak, is that if we look at something like JLR cyber attack, if we look at cyber attack Marks and Spencer's co-op as well, I think there's sometimes a sense there is more information that, on a high probability that is not being shared. For instance, on JLR, do you believe that the Russians were behind that attack?
On JLR, we've not made that. We've not made that confirmation. We've not made that conclusion.
Can you make it?
No, not to you tonight. No.
That's a shame. But I mean, in the sense of when do you see what the angle of my question is?
No, look.
When we speak vaguely, people then don't often understand the threat.
The serious point is that for everyone, this is making them more concerned, more uncertain. It's making people think Marks and Spencer's, JLR, Heathrow Airport. It drives home that sense of concern and vulnerability that we face. It's exactly why the Strategic Defence Review said, for the first time, we need to take homeland security more seriously. It's reflected in NATO, which is saying to every one of the 32 NATO nations, never mind Article 5, that's at the centre cornerstone of our collective defence, but Article 3 is about each and every one of these states, including us, to have in place our own homeland security responsibilities.
You see that
and we will
suggest that a greater degree of transparency might actually help your argument if we want a whole public effort. Do you think you could give a little more? I don't think you need to do now, but would you aim to give more?
I think I've talked quite openly about the level of attacks and aggression that we face, and some of the challenges that we must meet, including on drones, in the months. And to meet your deadline, a couple of years
Which
ahead.
is extremely important. Talking of the threat from the Kremlin, Rachel Reeves said...
I'm rather generous, if I may say so, but thank you. I'll take that.
Thank you. Rachel Reeves said in her speech Rachel Reeves said in her speech that Reform UK were in bed with Putin. Last week, a former leader of Reform in Wales, Nathan Gill, pleaded guilty to bribery charges relating to statements in favour of Russia he made in the European Parliament. You have said Nigel Farage will be unwelcome in the Lords because he didn't need any more Putin apologists. Do you think that Nigel Farage's party poses a threat to national security?
I don't think Nigel Farage or his party could be trusted with national security. And I think you can genuinely say one of the important acts of leadership that we've seen from Keir Starmer is to make sure that we collectively, with allies, have stood up to Putin. You've seen that recently with the drone attacks and the NATO response and the jets that we've sent in to contribute to that that eastern flank defence. And whilst we're standing up to Putin, you've got Farage and his party looking up to him, saying that, as Farage has, look, he's the leader they most admire.
You said that a while ago. He has not repeated it. He's been...
Oh, come on.
Oh, no, I mean, that's like, no fear, no favour. Okay,
there's something deeply suspect about Nigel Farage, isn't there? This is a man who says he admires Putin above all else, the man who wanted national insurance in our NHS, a man who recently has called on Trump to put tariffs on our country. Now, look, we will challenge reform every week between now and the next election. Because when you challenge reform, when you challenge Farage, it's clear he trades on anger, can't supply answers, and people, when they are taking a view of the next government, will take a view of whether we Labour have made the difference to their life, whether they think we're acting in their interest, but they will also take a view whether that's a party that can be trusted on national security in the future.
I mean, you've been around cabinet table, shadow cabinet table, and also before the Keir Starmer era, when you heard and discussed with Keir Starmer the idea of ramping up the rhetoric on reform that we've seen going into this conference, calling aspects of reform UK policy racist and immoral. Did you think, that's what we need to fight? Or was a little bit of you, who've been around a long time in this game, thinking, that could backfire because people have genuine concerns. A lot of people who once Labour are tempted by going towards reform, so are many Conservative voters, that you could be seen to be saying to those people, you're credulous or even a bit racist. No.
I mean, I live in and represent an area which voted 70% Brexit. I've dealt with UKIP when I ran the Rotherham by-election in 2012 that went from 0 to 24% overnight. I know the sentiment that they tap. There's a deep frustration and the failure of government to make a difference in anybody's lives in the last 14 years. So I really understand that. No political party can allow a polling advantage that Farage apparently commands to go unchallenged. Nobody can allow the sort of assertions and false promises that a wannabe party leader, let alone a wannabe prime minister, is making and not challenge those, which is exactly what we're doing, and that's why
we're a bit late to that
right.
conclusion, because over the summer things seem to just kind of drift a bit in that direction.
No, not at all.
Okay. Asked and answered. I have a question from our US colleagues. Are you confident the US is fully behind the UK, its NATO allies in Europe, in confronting the Russian threat? Your opposite number, Peter Hegseth, the newly named War Secretary, is calling on all senior US generals back to the US for a meeting in Virginia. I think there are quite a lot of concerns about that. And additionally, we have possibly federal government going into shutdown. This does not sound like a very comforting alignment when it comes to looking at our relationship with America and the protection of NATO's eastern flank.
Well, you asked a simple question in the middle of that.
I did. That was a nice long question, but that's because there was a lot of interest.
Which is, am I confident? Is Keir Starmer confident in the US? And the answer is yes. He was confident in the commitment that Trump gave him, that first meeting in the White House, that Trump said that the US, remains totally committed to NATO. I've discussed this a number of times with Pete Hegseth. But there is a requirement an expectation which is right and reasonable from the US, that countries like us, the Europeans, step up and do more.
So you have no concern, just another question that my US colleague asked, that Hegseth might be about to your state to pull US resources away from NATO's eastern flank?
No. What I do know, that, and because they've said publicly, they're doing a force posture review. We all know that their first priority, understandably, is the Indo-Pacific. And we all know, and you've seen the way that Keir Starmer has led the European effort to step up on defence spending, on Ukraine, on carrying a heavier burden, sharing more of the burden in NATO. And he and I have been arguing for nearly 5 years that European nations need to do more of the heavy lifting in NATO. The US are right to say that. We're responding to that. But Hegseth, when he first came to our defence ministers meeting in Brussels at NATO, made it very clear, we want the European nations to step up, but we are not stepping away.
Do you have a kind of beer drinking relationship with Pete Hegseth as well?
I haven't managed a beer with him yet. And I haven't
Can we get it done at the Politico pub sometime?
And I haven't managed to run with him yet. And I'm going to try one, but not the other.
Do you fancy being called...
I've done both with Richard Marles.
Do you fancy being called Secretary of State for War, which is his new title?
No, I'm looking to the future. I've actually got in my office an old red box that says Secretary of State for War.
Great.
And it dates from that period up to 1964 when we did have a Secretary of State for War. And that was one of a number of ministers in the military, and that one was responsible for the British Army and had been for more than 100 years.
But you don't fancy changing the brass plate?
Yeah, look, my job's defence. My job's building up our deterrence so that we can avoid the wars we don't want to fight, but we're strong enough to deal with them if we do.
Well, one more from me, and then I think we'll kick it out to the floor. But I must ask you this, and of course it follows from the recognition by Keir Starmer, by the government of a Palestinian state. The UK has been massively cutting down selling arms to Israel. Should we stop buying arms from them? The pressure is rising in some quarters after the recognition just to see much tougher arms embargoes on Israel, given the conduct of the war in Gaza.
I think we took tough action, we took early action, we took action that was rightly linked to the risk that any military supplies we put into Israel could be used and breach international humanitarian law in Gaza. That's why we withdrew 30 export licenses at the time. We've refused another 46 since. So we're a government that has stopped those arms sales where they may breach international humanitarian law. We're a government that has also been helping dropping aid into Gaza. And we're a government, as you say, that has for the first time recognised Palestine. And in doing so, brought along a number of other international countries with us.
And you use the word Palestine, even though the borders of a Palestinian state are not clear.
Sure.
Just very, very briefly, your logic, and then we'll...
It's about recognising and keeping alive the fundamental vision and belief that two states is the only way of securing in the long term a just peace. And we went into the last election with a commitment that we would take this step, and we'd take this step if it was part of a process. And I think you can genuinely say, look, we haven't acted alone, we've acted with other countries that have done the same thing. I think you can genuinely say this has shifted Arab opinion, where you've also got now Arab countries for the first time saying Hamas have no future in any Palestinian
And one
state.
of your old bosses, Tony Blair, is going to be back running that transitional authority in Gaza. Do you think he'd be as welcome back to the heart of foreign policy making or implementation under Keir Starmer?
Well, let's see how things develop.
All right, then. No, a couple of questions. One question. It's going to be you.
I think what concerns me, and something that definitely concerns a lot of our allies, Canada, USA, with the ramifications of global warming, is our vulnerability in the Arctic. And I suppose, what do you think we can do, and what do you think we can do to support our Navy in defending the High North?
Look, you're dead right. I've been concerned to talk about the High North for some time. And one of the visits that I did with Norway, which wasn't just about helping persuade them to land that £10 billion export deal for frigates with us, was a visit 400 miles north into the Arctic Circle. And what is clear is that Britain and Norway have for decades together defended that northern flank of NATO. And that northern flank of NATO will go further north as the High North opens up. So I think what can we do? We develop a deeper partnership with Norway. The fact that we will operate, we will develop, we will crew, and we will deploy the same anti-submarine frigates in future. A total combined fleet of 13 is part of that. And the day in, day out, week in, week out deployments we do with them and with the US is part of keeping that High North deterrence and NATO flank safe. We have deployed more Royal Navy vessels into the High North in the last year than anywhere else.
That really got the Defence Secretary going. Thank you very much for that. I realise that we're interfering with everybody's drinking time and next things, so I'm just going to let you go. But we used to, we'll sometimes do a quick fire round. We haven't even got time for quick fire round, but yeah, I thought of one. You just have to choose Keir Starmer or Andy Burnham.
I'll go with Andy Burnham's view that Keir Starmer's the best man for the job.
That's an answer. Thank you, John.